Great. Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here at the AI Summit. I'm really thrilled and honored. And I love the opportunity to sort of expand the conversation to some new areas that we've been thinking about really deeply at our studio at Zio Design, within the realm of what player experiences are and how computers can create richer and deeper emotions. So we're going to talk today about red pill, blue pill, narrative AI for deeper emotions. And in it, we're going to leverage some experiences that I've had, and you also have had, in one of the most emotional medium we have, which is, of course, cinema. So I'm one of the leading experts on emotion in games, and I have a model called the 4 Keys to Fun, which I used. I basically measured emotion on people's faces while they played. And I created a model about what kinds of actions players did to create different emotions. So from that perspective is what we're going to do today. I've also studied psychology at Stanford and a little bit of filmmaking. The 4 Keys has been used to inspire the AI for The Sims. We brought Wonder to Mist. We actually created some AR and VR UI for iFluence. And did Star Wars games. And the 4 Keys is actually going beyond the realm of games in a sense that this model of how action and emotion interact I've worked with everyone from Samantha Bee to Ted, IBM Watson. The sentiment analysis on IBM Watson is inspired by my work. And then we're doing stuff on emotion, a lot of emotion in XR and VR. So we're going to talk a little tiny bit about that. Because I think that on the computer side, AI plays a key role in some of these newer game platforms, especially with AR. This is a montage from one of the games I'm working on called Aladdin's Cave of Wonder. We're doing it on Magic Leap. So a combination of real-world item recognition and being able to recognize your hand gestures is going to create a much deeper experience for players. But not out of the box. We really have to understand what emotion is and how it gets done. So this is the 4 Keys to Fun. You can download it on our website. There's some white papers and other talks. We're going to go into not so much the 4 keys, but how it applies to AI. We're in the process of a many-year journey of developing in our studio an emotion engine, we like to call it. It's a way of creating emotions from the actions in games. A few quick things on emotion. The first thing is that in games, best-selling games, people's favorite games, that mechanics tend to fall into nested loops. Here are 4 of them. There is a micro loop, a core loop, a meta loop, and a social re-engagement loop. And that emotion and cognition are intertwined. So that may not necessarily be represented in your AI implementation, but we need to know on the wetware, they definitely coexist. Sense making and emotions are the thing. Actions and feeling are also related. And so if we ignore the player action as a vital agent in our AI systems, then we are ignoring a lot of what they feel. And so interaction, in a sense, designs emotion, as well as art and acting and other things that you may have already built AI systems around. Now, just like birds and planes, they both fly, but they fly differently. Okay, the same thing is true with games. Both movies create emotion and games create emotion, but they also have different mechanics, different ways of going about it. Now, when we start any new genre often leverages the old genre. So we have a lot to learn from film. But we also want to take and scrape away the stuff that maybe we don't need. So this is some scenes from Detroit, which has got an amazing narrative design for the characters, the 3 main characters especially. But there are 3,000 pages of shooting script, which took 2.5 years to shoot, which is way beyond the production length of most feature films. And we've got a very labor-intensive branching narrative that you have to design by hand, construct by hand to create the compelling, character arcs and other things. So in thinking for this talk, what I wanted to do was look at, well, what could we do instead of branching narrative? How could we apply other systems to the core of the game? So interactive narrative is what got me into games, 26 years ago. And it's still what keeps me, coming back. So what would that narrative AI look like? Well, some simple, very simple AI systems, that we already have, like, that increases engagement. So the rubber banding that in Mario Kart keeps it engaging, even if you're working with an NPC or if you're, playing with your friends. But then let's say but modern AI has done some really interesting things. And I thought for inspiration, here's where my sort of talk begins. If we think about the fake faces, how many people have seen this video? Yeah, not too many, okay. So there are 3 layers to the generative adversarial networks. There are on 3 layers. And what they're able to do is they're able to create real looking faces that actually don't exist. So there are different features that they are leveraging at the three layers. And then they can apply this also technique to other things, to create believable styles. So on the right, you have hotel rooms that don't exist, and on the left, cars that don't exist. So what might this mean in terms of gameplay? Might we be able to create AI systems that actually designed game mechanics for us or created more robust things for us? Well, I think that we want to look at it like a peanut butter cup. I like chocolate. I don't know about you. But there's a center of game, which I think is still going to be the game mechanic. But as a first step, we could probably design the chocolate coating. We could probably design a layer of AI, of narrative AI, surrounding the core experience that expands the emotional palette, the emotion architecture, the ebb and flow of the emotions in the player. So but here's a few more things to do that. The first is that in cognition and emotion, there's really, thread of life is just one way of generating emotion. It just generates one emotion. And the other thing is that in the neocortex and the lizard brain, the neocortex is where we take action, whereas the lizard brain, your emotion centers are deeper down. You make decisions in the forebrain. You feel the result of them in your inner brain, your older brain. And so it is the interaction between the key to creating emotions for people the key is really making those choices. So going from between those 2 parts of your brain back and forth, and how you feel before, during, and after. So when we're designing a narrative AI, we want to think about that whole sequence if we want to think about the problem as a whole from the top down. So in a game, what we have is a dungeon master, an NPC, choices that we make, items in the world, and players. Might all 5 of these be a inspiration or a layer or set of layers, inside an AI system for designing game mechanics? And I think they can. And if we wanted to approach an AI-driven game mechanic, AI narrative, we'd want to think about layered AI. And where the player experience, because the player experience comes from these multiple layers as they move through, I think that the AI coordinating the effect of these different levels of AI is super essential for creating intense emotional responses on the player. So as a model for this, we might take the 4 keys, for example, because it's a reliable way of creating emotion through mechanics, and look at the different types of fun. So you might have easy fun. I call it the bubble wrap of game design, just running around the world. It's curiosity, wonder, and surprise, emotion-driven. You might have the hard fun, which is usually your core mechanic, the frustration that leads to fiero, the feeling of winning. You might also have people fun, which is the social interaction, amusement, nachas, schadenfreude, the social interactions which make games a lot more fun. It's a game play on the couch, not so much on the screen, on a console game. And then, of course, serious fun. Well, it's like people going up to Fortnite, and they're not there to play the game. They're just there to hang out, right? Fortnite is the shopping mall of the current generation. So serious fun, creating the desire to acquire, the Zen-like focus. It makes winning feel more winning. It also makes the game feel less like a waste of time. So they're all great game mechanics. And again, you can find out more about the 4 keys elsewhere. But for today, I really want to focus us back on AI. So for the AI, what we've got is we want to look at an AI system, AI layers, that might generate or provide the opportunity to generate these different emotion sets. And I should say another thing about emotion is we can't actually, generate an emotion specifically. I can't just, hey, here's an emotion. But as a game designer, I could give you a little lever and say, hey, as a game designer, I say, hey, pull this lever and you might feel something. And so that's what we mean. So the AI could dynamically offer choices, offer opportunities to interact in a way over time that then could be orchestrated along several layers to hit a number of different emotional responses. And then to do that, many AI approaches now might focus on the meta, like the Dungeon Master, might focus just on NPC, believable NPCs, might just focus on interplayer, collaboration. But what we want is each layer of the AI to work together. And my vision of this, and obviously this is not code, but my vision of this, like you have the player and they're very emotional, they're going down the path, right? And it encounters, your AI system. And then that has multiple layers, which have different emotional responses, or the potential for different emotional responses coming from those layers. It senses that the player is nearby and also the emotional state of the player. And in context, moves its opportunity for emotions more towards a certain direction that might be compatible with what the player's feeling. The player feels that way, and then a second AI might come in to that and then add an additional emotion as the player moves through. So the player moves through, they might encounter another item, have an emotional response to that, and then an AI could come in, the AI layer could come in and maybe offer opportunities for different emotions, or perhaps redirect from the candlestick in our AR murder mystery to maybe the tennis shoe, which is the actual clue. And that could result in the player being more emotional or more happy. So these 4 patterns for layer AI is what I'd like to finish the talk with. And so we're going to look at some films and talk about these different frameworks. The first one is a frame. We're going to talk about making choices, sort of onions and layering and arcs, character arcs, as well as the opportunity to create emotion from items. So we'll talk about frames. I don't know how many people have really thought about this, but I thought there's a remarkable familiarity or similarity between Hunger Games and Fortnite. And so what's interesting is that with the Hunger Games, there's actually a framework, if you know Minsky's frames, right? That frame of the movie actually tells you how to feel about the game. So if you had an AI that was filled with a number of different frames of encounters, you could predict the emotional response of what the player was going to feel, and dynamically change within that frame, within that paradigm, how the player feels. This is, in a very simple sense, the revenge mechanic for Clash of Clans and, of course, the Super Bowl commercial. Another game that has a very strong frame is Beat Saber. How many people have played Beat Saber? Yeah. And so, you go in, you have lightsabers and boxes. You know exactly what to do because you've seen, Star Wars Episode 5, right? The scene with Vader and Luke Skywalker, right? And then you might come to mind other things, but that tells you how to feel. So, a framework can add emotion to this. And if your AI is dynamically exchanging frames, then you could actually create emotion over time, which is, in a sense, narrative. The second one is, of course, choice, which is what I named the talk after, red pill, blue pill. And the interesting thing about this is it's not just about a choice, like A or B in a branching narrative, but if you think about what red pill and blue pill really means, it's this really represents values, right? What are your core values? And the red pill is, of course, harsh truth, and the blue pill is the convenient fantasy. What about these decisions and what about these values could be mixed at? So there could be a whole layer of AI looking at the emotional values and worldviews about maybe how you see the world, or even your capabilities could go in to make a much richer type of choice. Another film, Sophie's Choice, is a very gut-wrenching, is named after the very gut-wrenching scene where she has to choose between one of her 2 children. Spoiler there, my apologies. But it basically then affects everything that you do, thereafter. You might think of this as just, you could design that as a branching narrative, but what if an AI had that ability to provide you with a series of these choices dynamically as the game went through? So my AR murder mystery could have quite a different playthrough time and time again. The character's choice, affects the past, the present, and their future. There's a mystery in the player's mind about the connections with these kinds of choices, and there's implied emotion around the events. Those would all be key traits to bake into the AI. And you could provide different perspectives, like who you play, might change how you feel about that particular event if you played a different role. And then speaking of characters, we go to the onion. And we've got different types of choices that are revealed. So this is a way out of the branching narrative. I first thought of it when I worked on the Myst series. I worked on 3 of the Myst games back in the day. And they have a lovely device, especially in the first one, of a book where the characters are gradually revealed page after page. And you have 2 brothers that you don't end up not wanting, at least I don't, want to help either of them, but you want to finish the game. So they create tension that way. The players are just, those characters are pre-baked. You're just deciding by how much you help each one, how much you learn about them, and then, of course, how much power they have in the world. Schindler's List has a character arc. Have people watched Schindler's List? How many people have watched? Okay, good. How many people watched Sophie's Choice? Anyone seen Choice? Okay, not as many. All right, Schindler's List then. Yeah, so for Schindler's List, what's interesting about him is he is part of the Nazi party at the beginning of the film, and then he arcs from that state to becoming, to hiring out, rescuing 1,000 Jews from the concentration camps to work in his factory. So he arcs as a character, which makes the film interesting. Crouching Tiger's Hidden Dragon also has 2 character arcs, and they're counter to each other. And so the character details revealed gradually over time like an onion, and that their moral and their values and their goals are at cross purposes, which makes it quite an interesting, much more interesting kind of journey for the 2 characters. And then in terms of AI, there would be the character design, but then also the action and environment could reflect that. So this is a piece of a fighting scene where, again, these characters are arcing. The 2 women are arcing in a different direction than the guy is. And so you see that in the environment, it's actually, there is a bit of visual play on what the characters are actually doing. So what kind of an AI system could generate that? Creating conflict and adversaries is a very crucial role for an AI as well. And Killmonger, and this is Black Panther, Killmonger and Nakia, if you think about it from a narrative design perspective, they're actually the same, they have the same goals, right? They just have different methods and they've taken them to different extremes. I love this quote by Joe Robert Cole, who's the screenwriter. And he says, I think the best villains have a point of view that's relatable, that you can empathize with. Right, and that's how he built the character for Killmonger. And then it can also, but it's not necessarily there, you share their perspective, but you don't exactly agree with it. If we go deeper into like an AI for character interaction, also the relationships are key. This is another scene from Black Panther. I would love to see an AI do this, create this on the fly. So there's an understanding of humor. There's an understanding of the relationships of the different characters. There's and then how they all relate. That would be a really amazing experience. So the relationships affect the outcome of that battle in a very strong way. So lastly, I wanted to talk about items. And items can have an emotion profile, and they can be built into what we call an emotion architecture, which is the actions, the whole structure of the way in which we interact, just like your interactive architecture for your game. You might be able to express that with the choices that you offer a player. So here the Black Panther is being offered 2 different high-tech new Panther suits. He's tempted by the gold one, but he chooses the silver, the more sedate one. Whereas, of course, the Golden Jaguar, his adversary, Killmonger, chooses the gold one. And that relates a lot to different emotions and their different perspectives on the world. In Lone Echo, which is a VR title, VR game, Character details are revealed gradually through the use of items. So you see different items that you can pick up and find out a story. So again, this is almost like an onion where you're just finding more about people. It's already pre-baked. But you can get more into them, and you can also skip the story if you want to. But what would it take for an AI not just to leave around power-ups, but to create items that were particularly meaningful and significant and then worked with that particular character? A story AI might also, and this is something that we're experimenting with at Zio, also use props to tell part of the story. This is Shape of Water. How many people have seen that? Okay, good. So it's a very fascinating. She's a princess that has no voice. She's a cleaner in a secret lab, and the props that she uses, the visual items in the world, are amazing storytelling tools. They actually, change the story as you move over time. A lot of it is told visually, and so that's another way of not having a lot of narrative. And if there were really deep semantic understanding of items in the AI, and then certainly for AR, a deep ability to recognize objects and understand not only the object, like this is a microphone, or that's a tennis shoe, or that's a bottle of soda, but what is the semantic meaning of it? And most of us have probably felt something about an object, like this is the companion cube. Yeah? Any Portal fans out there? And so AR, as I've said, semantic item recognition and use is going to be very crucial. Because if I want my murder mystery, in AR in my living room, it's going to be much more fun if there are, in addition to virtual props, they're actually using the real props. And it is going to need to know from us, from our play styles, understand us as players, whether it's more interesting to hide the clue under the coffee table or under the chair. Oops. And then we've got AI, understanding the room around you. So we're playing with that. This is Aladdin's Cave of Wonders, and that's really again going to be really crucial for understanding AR. Understanding the world for AR. So just imagine, to wrap up, let's reimagine, say, God of War, which is a very emotional, very wonderful game. What sort of frames does it bring, right? So this is, clearly a combat frame. And the fact that it breaks a lot of the frames for the franchise created a lot of interest in the game. And I think is a big part of why it was such a success. The frames that you're exploring in the game, you explore puzzles and there's an RPG element as well. But maybe we can explore relationships and items in more detail if we were going to frame it with more AI. You obviously have choices about things to protect, and so that creates a lot of social emotions. But then why not complicate things and then have more interesting relationships between the different characters? So now you have to make some more interesting choices. What kind of character onions what could you do dynamically to create these characters as they arc over time? Most of the AI here is pre-built in terms of what they're going to do. The script, it has a standard structure. But if we had something that was more dynamic, what could happen? And I think what we're going to do is, when we're going to win in this, is a narrative AI that could create something as compelling as the pyre scene, gathering his wife's ashes in God of War, but dynamically, without any human intervention. So that's it. Those are the four frames. So for narrative AI, frames, they do a lot of the work for you because by association, you're automatically bringing a lot to the table as a player. A lot of emotions come from association. Your choice, you're going to engage your belief systems of players, through their system, through their philosophy, their worldview. Onions and arcs will either, deepen your relationship or arc your characters over time. And items, they'll all add in layers of emotional resonance and meaning, as well as bonuses and stats. So we've got the idea of layered AI, but then a word of caution is we can also do sentiment analysis. And as we've done with social media, for better or worse, there's some really great opportunities to create really compelling player engagement from sentiment analysis of chat or utterances, or some of the, obviously we could measure emotion on people's faces as well. So thank you very much. Thank you for your time. Do we have time for questions? Yeah. Any questions?
Hello. So I was curious, there is in Paradox Games Crusader Kings, which is known for ability to generate a lot of stories through AI. So have you used it in your research, and how does it fit in as your scheme?
So could you say the beginning of the question?
The game Crusader Kings is able to generate a lot of stories like through AI. Like, have you used it as an example? How does it fit in this?
Yeah,
game?
we haven't done a specific study on that one, unfortunately. Yeah, on that particular title.
Sorry, but
yeah.
It's just like it's one of the games which is like has as a central feature the ability to generate stories.
Yeah, so what we want to look at is so there's an interesting point in terms of stories is, do we take it from I think a first step in addition, instead of trying to create a story generator, would be to create a moment-to-moment generator. Because if you think about the birds and the planes for a moment, is that the reason why a story might move us is that it is from it is its ability to move us emotionally. And so if we, and that's in all of the techniques from three-act structure and that sort of thing, are all about designing ways of creating emotions. And so if we look from the game design, we're going to actually be able to do more than stories do by being able to trigger emotions in our own unique ways, as well as with more traditional story arcs. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, first of all, great talk. Thanks for coming out. So I'm familiar with games like Gone Home Tacoma, where the stories are very linearly driven, but you're interacting with environmental objects to build that kind of core narrative. And that kind of reminded me of a lot of the onion arcs that you were talking about during your talk about peeling those layers back. So I was wondering how we could integrate generative AI and that kind of deep level of thinking to kind of pre-populate worlds with those narrative aspects to drive maybe a linear and even a more dynamic narrative story.
Yeah, well, I think that what we're exploring is we're looking at, say, a room like in Follow the White Rabbit. It starts in Paris, a cafe in Paris, and it's about a magician who's been a charlatan like all his life until one day the magic actually works. So we start with some, as reference, some planned out, ways in which you get out. It's an escape room, so ways that you would get out of the room, and then narrative arcs that would get you there. And then to break that up into more the micro moment to moment, and then a micro moment to moment system, so that players could, in a sense, sort of mix and match their way out of it. There is a feeling, a tension that I feel in games that have a very strong narrative where I'm trying to second guess the designer. Whereas in like a murder mystery, when I have like a murder mystery dinner at home with my friends, we can be much more free form. And we're trusting that there's going to be something interesting around the next corner. But not that we have to finish the maze in the same way each time. So I don't think that we have language to describe these other patterns. But every time we bring something in from film, I think there's an opportunity to use it, to leverage it, and then there's also an opportunity to break it. So I try and have both of those design sessions to make it much more rich. And again, it's we're just getting started, so I'm really looking forward to what people come up with.
Awesome.
So great question. Thank you.
Which of the devices to create emotions that you described were the most fruitful? Which one, if you only had to use one, which one gives the biggest bang for your buck for amount of effort?
Well, the most effortless one would be the one I started with, would be frames, because frames are also icons. I talk a lot in my other talks about iconic design. If you use something that has an emotional resonance, you instantly get it. Disney, in their line design, will often do that. So like the old Pirates of the Caribbean, new Pirates a little bit, but as you're waiting for, and then as you get on these dark rides, you're hit with, here's a pirate chasing a lady, here's a lady chasing a pirate. They're taking all these memes, all these tropes, and that is a fairly easy. If you had a library of those, you could put those into the player thing. But I think the second easiest one would of course be Onions, where it's a character arc that's already built. And you might be able to have 3 or 4 different onions, and being able to shuffle those decks, and you would have some very interesting characters that change over time. And that would be a very, much easier than trying to recognize the difference between a dollar bill and this, box of water.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I think we're just at time, so thank you. But if you want to, I'll be here in the back, I guess, after there's a speaker thing. Thanks very much for having me here. All right, I look forward to making what y'all get.